For this assignment, you'll be shading a sphere using the 5 steps to the Chiaroscuro method. To do this, find a lid or something round to trace on your paper. The object must be at least 3 inches in diameter. I tend to use a sour cream lid. Some kind of can, anything that is round that is at least 3 inches in diameter. We're going to shade your circle so that it becomes a sphere. Don't forget to add a cast shadow. Once you're done shading, you're going to label the 5 steps to the Chiaroscuro method. Let's get started. This tutorial is all about using the 5 steps to the Chiaroscuro method. I asked you to find something that is round that you can trace onto your paper that's at least 3 inches in diameter. So what I mean by that is making sure this lid right here is actually marked at the 4 inches. So this is well beyond what I need. I'm going to use this as my stencil. So I'm going to place that in the center of my paper and trace around it. You don't really want a dark mark, so just slightly, enough to where you can see the circle. Perfect. Okay. Before we can start shading, we need to decide where our light source is coming from. So I told you before in the reviews that if your light source is coming on the left-hand side, these steps are going to follow. So your shadow would be over on the right. If your light source is above, everything's going to follow, and your casted shadow will be on right below it. And then if your light source is on the right hand side, your cast shadow will then fall onto the left. So for today, we're going to have our light source coming in from the left hand side, so our cast shadow is going to be on the right. You first need to determine where that light source is going to be, and I like to lightly draw out a circle or an oval. So when I'm drawing, I always hover above. I hover above and I just kind of rotate my pencil around until I get about the size or where I want to place this. And this is just kind of preliminary. We're just laying this stuff down right now. Very lightly, you're going to put this on here. So that's where my direct light source, that's my highlight, is going to be hitting. So then our next step is for our light. So that's going to be the next part of this. We want to make this look as realistic as possible. So again, our light is not the majority of the sphere. So again, I'm hovering, but I have a curve to my pencil. I'm not going straight. I have a nice curve to my pencil. I want this to look three-dimensional. Of course, it's flat right now. So what I want to do is I'm just deciding where I want to place it. It doesn't go too far from that highlight. And you'll notice I kind of sketch this on here. I don't make a nice solid line because I might change it a bit. I want this to look a little bit rounder. So I think that's where I'm going to place it. Our next step is shadow. It's going to take up the majority of this. In fact, almost the entire rest of this, except one little sliver. That is our reflected light. Sorry if you can hear that. That's grass is being cut outside. So I'm going to get rid of all this extra stuff right here. And again, I'm just kind of shaping things up, laying things out. And the last thing is going to be our cast shadow. When you map out your cast shadow, a lot of the times I will see students make another circle below it. So it'll look something like this. And that's not correct at all. It is if your light source was kind of over here, but that's not really right. And a lot of the times this is actually more of what I see. It's kind of hard for me to do it. And that's not correct at all. So let's put this on here right. When you're making that cast shadow, it's more of an oval shape. So you want to stay kind of close to the bottom of this. And again, if you watch, I sketch, I sketch, I sketch. And you want to kind of keep it flatter. You can always go and add more. You don't want it to be quite round. It's more of a skewed, more of an oval shape. And for me, I like to move my paper around a little bit because that doesn't look very... You're pretending like there's a flat tabletop here. So I overshot it a little bit. I can come back in here with my eraser. And that's why we draw really lightly, so that you can come in and erase. When you sit there and you make really harsh lines and you put too much pressure on this, then it makes it hard to kind of clean it up. Something like that. All right, so let's start with our shading. When I shade, I don't like using a mechanical pencil. I like to hold my pencil sideways, just like this, and I actually hold a little bit closer towards the end of the pencil. Gives me a little bit more control. The further away I am from that, the less control I have of the pencil. Again, it's all about preference, but I feel that a mechanical pencil is just always going to have this streak to it, and it's not nice and smooth, and that's what we want, is something nice and smooth. We want to make it look as if it's realistic. Now when you shade, you want to work with the direction of the object. So we know this is a curved object, so we want to work kind of in a curved or windshield wiper method. If this was a square, if it was a cube, we'd want to work in a linear. But because this is something curvilinear, we want that to have a curve. And we want to keep it directional. You don't want to go multi-directional. That's not going to look correct. I want to see that you are doing things directionally. So from our highlight, that's our lightest area. Think of it as, this is where our direct light is hitting. So it's going to be on a value scale, would be around a 1. And then as we get away from it, we're going to get towards a 2. So as you work your way around this object, you want to, this is where that direct light source is hitting, and I'm going directionally. I'm using that curve. There's a curve to my pencil, and I'm drawing very lightly, very light pressure, and I'm working my way around it. I can work in small circles, very small circles. I'm just adding in some light values into this. You'll see I followed around that circle, but I'm working directionally in a windshield wiper motion. It's easier for me to move my paper. And what I'm doing right now is I'm actually applying the light. So the light is getting indirect light. It's still getting a little bit of light on here. I'm sorry, it's still getting some direct light from our light source, but it's not getting that spotlight that our highlight is getting. So right now we're kind of working on the number 2, the second step to our Chiaroscuro method. But I'm staying in that curvilinear shape. So as I work my way out, I'm still keeping that nice curvilinear shape. Very lightly touching, hovering above almost. And when we get towards this area, you really want to have that curve right here. We're going to work our way back. coming around this. And you want to blend that into itself. I've got a lot of little lines going everywhere, and that's something I can fix later. And if you notice, my line doesn't really come all the way over, so I'm going to come over here and fix this a little bit more. So you can also do circular motions, and that's what I'm kind of moving towards. Blending this nicely. Again, I'm using the side of my pencil. So you don't always have to do linear or big old, windshield wiper movements. You can also work in small little circular areas. And it kind of makes it easier in some parts of this. And what we'll do is we'll come back in with a pencil, an eraser, and we will get rid of this harsh line that we can see on here right now. We want to make this look really curved. And so if you have a blending stump at home, I suggest you use it. You can also try and use your finger. Again, this is not archival paper. You can make a blending stump. So if you're really good at making those paper footballs, make a blending stump. You can just fold paper up and create your own. So we'll get away from this second step right now. We're going to move on to the third step. So our third step is our shadow, and this is the one that's getting indirect light. So it's going to be darker and darker as it gets away from us. So you can make much larger, windshield wiper movements on this one. You can also work in small circular motions. You just want to add that dark value to this, or this darker value to this. Remember, you want to keep that curve. So when you're working on these edges, you want it to almost look like it's curving away from you, curving away from you. Something kind of like this. And on the other side, the opposite side, which I like to move my paper around, I'm going to kind of curve like this. So essentially, this is what you're doing. That's why I like using the edge of the pencil. I'm going to make it a little bit slower. So up here, grab and rotate down. And this is my stopping point, or where I mapped out my stopping point. So I really don't want to go any further than that right now. So if you look at my sphere right now, I've paused it and I kind of shaded it in a little bit more. It's very, very scratchy, and I want to try to get rid of that as best as I can. So I'm going to work on the edges of my sphere right now. I'm going to turn my paper. And it makes it so much easier if you move that paper around. And now I'm going to start thickening and darkening up those areas. So I'm going to work on my edges first, following along with my pencil. And I'm going to start and I'm just making single swipes, but I am darkening those edges. They're still working in a curvilinear motion. It's going to take a little bit longer than it would be if we were using standard drawing pencils, because this is an HB pencil, and this isn't really its main purpose. We can still get this done with it. It just takes us a little bit longer. So I'm working my way. Remember, this right here was where we started to have, was where that value number 2 ended, step number 2 ended and step number 3 began. So this is where the light is, and now we're working on the shadow. So don't forget where you marked that. My pencil, I've also kind of whittled it down to where it has a nice sharp point. Maybe that's not the easiest thing for when I am shading. This is not my favorite pencil. It's got a really roughness to it. It's not nice and smooth. Not because it's an HB pencil. It's just, it's not the best quality pencil. I can't really explain it. I just don't like it. But anyway, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit, right? Just got to work with what you got with right now. So I accidentally made a really dark line there. You could just take an eraser, and actually that's what I'll do. I'll just come in here and I'll lightly erase a little bit. And then I gotta fill this spot back in, a little bit of pressure. And I'm gonna rotate this around, and I'm gonna work now from over here. So it's easier for me to move my paper around, and I'm working in that curvilinear motion. Really want to erase that original tracing of the lid that I used. I'm working in a windshield wiper or curvilinear motion. I never change it. You have not seen me once going in a different direction. We want this to stay curvilinear. So always do that. I want to see that you're working directionally. If I see any kind of linear marks on here, I will take off points. I want to see that you are working in this curvilinear motion. You work with the object you have. So if you had, the Chiaroscuro method can be done on any shape. If it were done on a square or a cube, again, you're going to just be working with what type of shape it is. A cube is linear. It's flat. So you don't work with this curved shape. If you did that, it's going to look like it's bowing. Now, if that's what you were going for, then do that. But majority of the time when you're working on a cube, you wanted to keep that cube look. I'm just kind of working in here and building up that value in these corners. Now what I'm going to actually do is use my finger to blend this in. I know I told you that's not necessarily what you're supposed to do, but again, we're working with what we have, and I'm trying to think of materials that you would have, and everybody's got their fingers, so we're going to use that. If you want to create your own little blending stump, that would be nice. It would be a nice tool for you to have. So I've kind of, with that 3, I've almost gotten rid of that original line there. If you were, if you wanted to, you can always come back in very lightly with your eraser and kind of clean that up, get rid of that line, and then you can always draw it back in with your pencil in a sketching motion, sketching little tiny strokes of the pencil. You don't really want to put one solid line on there. So now just kind of building this up, and I'm going to use my finger and try to move this around and see if we can kind of blend things out a little bit, get rid of some of those stark lines in there. Again, not the ideal situation. It does help out a little bit. And we would have been using, drawing pencils in class, so you would have been using more of a B pencil for this. It would look a little bit better. So I feel like that value looks pretty good, that we've done step number 3 pretty well. So let's go back, because right now we have this big jump from, step number 3 into step number 2. And we want to kind of fade that line a little bit. So we're going to work step number 3 into number 2. So we're going to do a nice gradient almost. We want to fix this right here. So I like to come in here with my eraser now, and I'm going to get rid of, very lightly, I'm going to get rid of my tracing, because you don't want that outline. You want to make it look like it's one continuous piece. So I've gotten rid of my outline. Now I really want to work this into it, and I don't want it to have such a stark line. So I'm going to kind of work on the edges over here. On the other side, move my paper. I'm just kind of trying to not make it look so contrasted. Really trying to blend these two things in. I'm going to pull this number 3, third step, kind of up here a little bit. Because you really want it to make it look rounded. So it goes a little bit up. And we can kind of come in with our finger now and move that around a bit. Blend that a bit. It's looking a little bit better. I really don't like this pencil. It's very scratchy. As far as our highlight goes, I don't want this, again, I don't want this line inside of here. So I'm going to work my circular motion inside of that space, working my way around it and outside of it. And you'll notice I have a lot of these little lines in here. Again, it's just working with that god-awful pencil I've got right now. I would have used drawing pencils with this. Always use your eraser to kind of lighten. Looking pretty good. Use that finger there and just smudge around just a bit. Again, staying away from that center area, and you can always come back in with an eraser a little bit and pick things up. And you'll notice that that spot got a lot smaller. That's fine. We've gotten rid of that outline now, and it's starting to look almost like a whole piece. We can come up in here and add a little bit more to this if we wanted to. Darken up those edges. But overall, it looks pretty good. So let's get down here and back down to the bottom. So this is, I'm going to darken this area up a little bit more down here. And then that little glimmer, that's that reflected light that helps communicate back to the viewer what it is that we're looking at. So we are looking at a sphere, and we want them to know that. So what we're going to do is it actually becomes just a little bit lighter. So we're going to keep that dark line right about there, and then as we get towards the edge, lighten up. And you can always, if you want to, shade that in and then take your eraser and just erase a nice thin, almost thumbnail shape into your sphere. I'm kind of darkening at my value 3. I think it just needs a little bit of a pick-me-up. Always working in that windshield wiper motion. So what I'm going to actually do is use the eraser on my pencil and just kind of clean that area up. I want to get rid of that original tracing on there. I'm just going to build up this, I draw and then I erase, draw and erase. I'm not, if you notice, I'm almost sketching with my eraser. I'm just picking up a little bit as I go. I'm not, putting a lot of pressure on there and really making sure it erases. I'm just wanting to pick up a little bit of that graphite. Come in here. Lifting a little bit up, adding a little bit more. It's a process. And now let's work on our cast shadow. That is our darkest area, our darkest value. I like to move mine. Now we're going to work directionally with this, but we're flat. We're on something that's flat, so we're not going to necessarily work in a curvilinear, like we're going to work this way. No, we're going to work almost like a flat motion because this is on the ground. We want to make this look like a shadow. So I'm now working in a linear motion. I'm going to kind of trace over where that end of my sphere is because that's my darkest value right down here. This is where that meets. And I'm just working in a linear motion, making a movement, going back from the start, making a movement, dragging that out, working in a linear motion. You can go back and forth if you want to, like you're coloring. You really want this to be dark. Now, it's going to be darker next to the object. Why would it be that way? Because that's where our shadow is the deepest. So as we get away from that object, we're starting to get some indirect light, and it will become lighter. Some of my drawings, or if you look through the videos, it doesn't necessarily show you that. And I did mention that in the introduction, but I want us to do that for this. I want to see this getting lighter. And that's also another way for me to tell me if you've watched the video or not. All the way through. So as it gets away from the object, the sphere, I want it to just become just slightly lighter. Another way for me to tell if you watch the video is if it's going to be nice and flat and oval shaped, or if it's going to be like another circle right underneath it. I want to kind of blend that out just a bit. Coming back over here where that shadow meets. Really darkening that up. Not bad. Not bad for working with an HB pencil. So after you have gotten your chiaroscuro laid out on here, you're going to label this. So you can either put numbers on here and make me a little chart on the side that tells me what 1 is, 2 is, 3 is, or you can just draw a line to it, and that's what I'm going to do. So from this right here, this is our step number 1. And that's our highlight. That's the one that's getting that direct light. Then this would be number 2. And that is our light. It's still getting some of that direct light, but not like a spotlight. Our next area would be number 3. And that's going to be our shadow. Our next one is our number 4. And that's our reflected light. That is what is communicating to our viewer that this is indeed a sphere. And then our last one, number 5. This is the cast shadow. So there we are, the 5 steps of the Chiaroscuro method. Highlight light, shadow, reflected light, and cast shadow.